This is TTT Live. I am DK Roster. The Ministry of Health is giving an update on the status of COVID-19 in Trinidad and Tobago. And we're bringing you live coverage on TTT, Chalk City 91.1 FM, Sweet 100.1 FM, Next 99.1 FM, and on Facebook at TTT Live Online. Now over to the Minister of Communications, Donna Cox.
Good morning and welcome to today's virtual media conference to apprise you of government's efforts to combat COVID-19. Today with me are the Minister of Health, the Honorable Terence Dial Singh, and the Minister of Finance will be joining us soon. The Minister of Health, the Honorable Terence Dial Singh, will provide an update on COVID-19 in Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you very much, Minister Cox. Good morning to ladies and gentlemen of the media, and good morning to all of Trinidad and Tobago. Minister Cox, with your blessing and permission, I start off today's, and I just touched my face, chronic. I start off today's press conference on a very pleasant note. May the 12th, 1820, 200 years ago, a very important person was born, and that person was Florence Nightingale. And today, we celebrate her 200th birthday in the form of International Nurses Day. Florence Nightingale came to light, and I use that word light both literally and figuratively, because she was known as the lady with the lamp. When she was tending to wounded soldiers during the Crimean War, and she gave birth to the modern nursing traditions. Fast track to 2020, 200 years later, and nurses, the descendants of Florence Nightingale, are now involved in another conflict, that of COVID-19. In the Trinidad and Tobago context, and actually global context, it is nurses whose compassion, skill, determination, and leadership has helped to flatten the curve in Trinidad and Tobago. Nurses have always been the backbone of our healthcare system. And it was very sad for me on Mother's Day not to be able to visit nurses and mothers for the first time in 5 years. As you know, every Christmas, Mother's Day, Father's Day, I go out to visit with the nurses to identify with them. And I always tell nurses, if you can work on a public holiday, Christmas, whatever, I can come out and support you. So today, it is my absolute pleasure to recognize nurses all around the world, and especially our nurses in Trinidad and Tobago, on the occasion of International Nurses Day. May you continue in the traditions of Florence Nightingale to be the lady with the lamp. I now go on to today's update. Tests done to date are 2,358. Unique patient tests, 2,016. Repeat tests, 342. We have done 738 community tests throughout Trinidad and Tobago, and to date, all of those are negative. The total number of positive cases remains at 116. Total number of discharges, 107. Total number of deaths, 8. Same 1 in Tobago and 7 in Trinidad. Total number of patients hospitalized is 1, and that 1 person is in Cora. We still have our, I believe, 70 persons in quarantine at Debe. At the home of football, Couva, we have no patients there. In ICU, HDU, no patients there at Couva. We just have that 1 patient who I am told is stable in Cora. So that's my update for today. But before I hand over to you, Minister Cox, I just want to reiterate to the public that as we move into the second day of the easing of restrictions, it becomes more and more imperative that the vast majority of citizens adhere to the public health measures to wear masks, to sanitize, stay home if you are ill, physical distancing, cough etiquette. It is only those simple public health measures that are recommended that will help us to make decisions next week as we transition from the end of phase 1 of the ease up to the beginning of phase 2, 3, and 4. I just want to give you one quote this morning, a very sensible quote from a Facebook post. And it goes like this, and I will end with this. Why does the government always have to enforce and legislate everything? This is a Facebook post. Why does the government always have to enforce and legislate everything? Can't we allow common sense to prevail? Mask, distance, sanitize. That's a Facebook post, and Minister Cox, I could not have said it better. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. And we all join with you in saying thank you to the nurses and wishing them happy International Nurses Day. The Minister of Finance, the Honorable Colm Imbert, will speak on unplanned financial expenditure, give an overview of relief and support measures taken by the government, and will provide basic statistics on those efforts. Minister Imbert.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. I thought it was necessary for me to come to the press conference to give some information in view of the misinformation that is in the system with respect to what the government is doing in terms of providing relief, financial support and otherwise, for the COVID-19 period. I have actual figures and projected figures in terms of what various ministries and agencies are doing. And let me start with the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, which at this time has the following programs: food cards, cash support cards for needy persons generally, food cards for persons whose children would have been in receipt of meals from the school feeding program. There's also additional social support to persons already in receipt of various forms of welfare from the Ministry of Social Development, such as public assistance, disability grant, and so on. There's also a program for food support for retrenched workers, support for persons who have applied for their senior citizens pension and have not yet received it, support for persons who have applied for public assistance and disability assistance and have not yet received it, income support for retrenched persons, food vouchers, hampers, rental assistance. So far, in all of these categories combined, the Ministry of Social Development has spent $98.1 million to date. The projected total to the end of September 2020 is $400 million in the categories that I have just announced. With respect to the Office of the Prime Minister, you would have heard of the program to provide funding to the major religious bodies, churches, to provide food for the poor and needy through their normal food distribution programs. So far, the government has provided $10 million to religious bodies, and the projected total to the end of September is $30 million. The Ministry of Agriculture has provided fresh produce to the tune of $1.3 million and expects a total of expenditure of $10.7 million, and that figure may actually go up in terms of increasing the amount of fresh produce available through this program. National security, in terms of additional expenditure for its various divisions, So far, they've spent 3.7 million, and they expect to expend up to 8.3 million. The Ministry of Health, so far, has spent $55 million. We expect them to spend somewhere in the vicinity, and this is not an easily determinable figure, because if, for example, there would be an increase in the number of cases, God forbid, then the Ministry of Health would have to spend some more money. In addition, if a decision is taken, or if it is possible for university students, for example, to come back to Trinidad and Tobago, they would have to be quarantined, and that's an expense on the Ministry of Health. So we have a provision, additional provision for the Ministry of Health of $250 million. We expect their actual expenditure to be $137 million plus $250 million. But that is something that is not easy to determine, and we are giving health every cent they need to cope with the pandemic, and they're doing a great job, by the way. The Ministry of Finance, the salary relief grant, so far we have spent $12 million, and we expect at the end of the program to spend $490 million on the salary relief grant. With respect to credit unions, I've signed agreements in my capacity as corporation sole with the umbrella bodies of the credit unions, the Credit Union League and the Credit Union Financing Body, and over 20 credit unions, individual credit unions, to give them $100 million for their membership, and that may be increased in due course with another provision geared towards small business lending within the credit union movement. In terms of VAT refunds, we've already paid out $700 million in cash, and bonds of $3 billion should start from this week. In terms of face masks, the Ministry of Finance through NIBDEC had put out a tender for face masks, and we received the tenders last week. Well, they evaluated last week, and we have a provision of $5 million for face masks, which we will make available for distribution to the public free of charge through NGOs. Caribbean Airlines, as you will realize, Caribbean Airlines is earning no money at this point in time, so that we have secured a $65 million loan to assist Caribbean Airlines. That's 442 million Trinidad and Tobago dollars. We may need to give WASA some supplementary funding that is being looked at right now. The Tobago Regional Health Authority has received $50 million from the Ministry of Finance so far. The THA $5 million. The RHA is for health expenditure. The THA is for enterprise development. We also have allocated another $50 million for hotel upgrades, and we have further provisions for Tobago in due course. In terms of support to the small and medium enterprise sector, that is currently in the final stages of a loan program where the government will subsidize the interest and provide some form of guarantee, and we have allocated $300 million for that. The Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government has so far spent $3.9 million on sanitization, and a further $10 million has been allocated to them for food support. At the end of the day, we intend to spend $30 million on food support through the Ministry of Local Government and $16 million on sanitization. The police have reported they have spent so far $5.3 million on personal protective equipment, and I would expect them to spend another $10 million. When you add it all up, the government has already spent $934 million up to yesterday on COVID relief, and when you add everything up, including the VAT bonds, the Caribbean Airlines facility and so on, the total is $6 billion. I think I can stop there and answer any questions that may come to us.
Thank you very much, Minister Imbert. Members of the media, The floor is now open. Remember to identify yourself and the media house you represent before posing your question. We want to give as many of you an opportunity to pose questions to us, but that means in our limited time, we will have to give each media house a chance to get a maximum of 2 questions in. Once we have completed the pool and time allows, I will come back to you. Let us keep this in mind as we begin taking your questions. Newsday.
Hi, good morning. Shane Bill from the Newsday.
Good morning.
I have 2 really quick questions. The first one for the Minister of Health. Minister Dialsing, can you just clarify the mask protocol for people who are preparing and selling food in public places? Do you know if the police or the public health inspectors can enforce or sanction a particular vendor or outlet they fail to follow the mask protocols? And the second question is from the Minister of Finance, Mr. Imbert. Just wanted to get some response to concerns from small and medium enterprises who believe that they're not receiving sufficient relief from the government. I read today that my ROMP, Rushton Parry, actually raised some concerns about that. So just wanted to get some feedback from you in that respect.
Okay.
Sure, you go.
Sure. So thank you, Shane. Shane, the question you asked is a very important question. As we stand right now, there is no law which carries a penalty or a sanction for not wearing a mask. What we have done so far is use moral suasion, and we are particularly targeting food sellers that their employees should be wearing masks. It's not a law, but it's a public health recommendation. Some food sellers have adopted this across the board, and I want to congratulate them, while some haven't. Some food sellers are also insisting that anybody coming to purchase food must wear a mask, and I highly recommend that. As you know, Shane, I made a very impromptu visit to Independence Square after the press conference yesterday, and I started walking from west to east along Independence Square. And I saw the good, the bad, and the ugly. Actually, I saw the excellent, the so-so, and the ugly. One establishment had everything that you could ask for. And then you walk down a few yards, they had nothing. So what we did yesterday, because the CMO and the public health inspectors accompanied me on that little 45-minute tour from Independence Square to Charlotte Street. We are now going to come up with some minimum requirements, which we will go to the Attorney General with to put into the regulations as to how persons who operate food establishments should protect not only themselves, but their customers. So I hope that answers your question, but right now, it is due to moral suasion and not the force of law. Thank you.
Minister Imbert.
Yes, thank you very much. There's a lot of loose talk from members of the opposition in terms of not providing adequate support. But there are no details. The statement is made, we're not providing sufficient support. That is the MP from Mayaro, for example. But no specifics. Let me give some specifics. In the $700 million in VAT refunds that we have actually posted out in cash, the first set of refunds were for persons who were owed VAT refunds of $250,000 or less. The second set were persons who were owed between $250,000 and $500,000. And you will agree that businesses that are owed up to $250,000 and then up to $500,000 in VAT refunds would all be small businesses. They would not be large businesses. So that $700 million in cash that we would not normally have paid out in tax refunds, that was directly intended to assist small and medium enterprises. The money that we have put into the credit unions, the $100 million, is for their members and also for those small businesses that borrow from the credit unions. And again, that is to allow the credit unions to give them low interest loans at very good rates. When I did the calculations, you're looking at loans somewhere around 3%, and with moratoriums on repayment of over a year and so on. So that is also intended to help the small and medium enterprise sector. In addition, the salary relief grant of $490 million would certainly help persons employed by small and medium enterprises, as would the $400 million in all of those social support programs that I called out, the food cards, the support for retrenched persons, the rental assistance, the income support, and so on. And in addition to that, we have also allocated a further $300 million directly for small and medium enterprises. And one has to be very careful. When I look at some of the requests being made, they're quite unreasonable. For example, there's a request that we should waive taxes. If we waive taxes, we have no money to provide relief. Money doesn't grow on trees. We've been asked to waive water rates. WASA is already struggling every month. It depends on a subsidy from the government of $200 million a month. That's what we give to WASA, because the cost of running our water supply system and the income that comes in, there's a deficit every year of over $2 billion. We subsidize taxpayers, and the government subsidize WASA every month to the tune of $200 million. So can you imagine if you said, all right, we will stop collecting water rates, what that will do? That means more money would have to come from the Treasury to support WASA, because the cost remains the same. WASA has not sent home anybody. They have not cut anybody's wages or anything like that. Similarly, I've seen a request that we defer or waive electricity bills. Again, the TNTEC is unable to pay the National Gas Corporation for gas every year to the tune of $500 million a year or more. Again, the government subsidizes that. Every government, every now and then, goes and arranges loan financing to deal with that expenditure, because National Gas Company has to pay for the gas from BP and Shell. They don't get it free. And then when they pass it on to TNTEC, TNTEC is unable to pay for it because, again, electricity rates in Trinidad and Tobago are very low. So if we were to forego water rates, forego electricity rates, that just means that the Treasury will have to put out more. I've seen a request that we pay rent. Again, that just means that more and more funding would have to come out from the Treasury. So what we decided to do instead is that we've allocated $300 million for that sector. We are defining a small business as any business that has a turnover annual of up to $20 million a year. So you're looking at about $1.6 million a month. It's at the top end, it may seem a little high, but that's for small and medium enterprises. Let me correct that. So we're defining a small and medium enterprise as an enterprise whose annual turnover, sales, would be $20 million a year. And for those categories, we are coming up with a very innovative loan program where the government will subsidize the interest. We're looking at a full subsidy of interest on this loan program, and the government will guarantee part of the collateral required for the loans. We can't guarantee 100% because it would mean that the small businesses could walk away without paying the loans, and it would just be a hit on taxpayers. So that is going to be done through First Citizens Bank as the government-owned bank, so that the interest rates can be controlled at the level of the government. And I am certain that $300 million allocation will go a long way to helping people. It's for payroll support. It's to keep people in jobs. It's to allow them to remain in business. So the details of that will be finalized this week. And I would think next week I can give full details on that SME support program. So I hope that answers that question.
Thank you, Minister. Express.
Good morning, Camille Hunt, Express.
Morning.
Minister, can you explain why the country's last COVID patient was moved from the Kruger facility to the one in Cora? The patient's family is saying that the patient is not receiving the same quality of care at Cora, and that the patient feels isolated and traumatized. Also, without breaching patient confidentiality, can any information be provided on the treatment history of that patient?
I cannot provide patient treatment history. Come on. It was Mr. Stephen Cummins who asked last week, what am I doing to protect patient confidentiality? Come on. And the patient would have been moved for clinical reasons overseen by the chief medical officer. I cannot divulge patient information. Please. It was done in the best interest of the patient. That is all I could say at this point in time. Okay?
Thank you, Minister. ACP News.
Hi, good morning. Private Harry, ACP News. Minister of Finance, I just want to find out how are we going to finance all of these loans that we're taking now? And to the Minister of Health, there are a number of requests being made by people who run pools, you know, and they wanted to know if, you know, because they can social distance, you know, just like in golf, for example. Right. And a lot of elderly people who exercise can't walk, you know, and they use the pool. So they want to know if any consideration would be made along those lines for pools. Thank you. Okay.
Could we ask the operators to put up the pyramid, please? We need to be reminded constantly that if we given to every request to open up everything, we might as well flip a switch and open the entire economy. And what you are going to have is what I shared with you about a month ago. It takes one person to infect two to infect, was that 6? And then eventually that one person infects 10. Then each of those 10 go on to infect 10 more. So 10 will infect 100, 100 will infect 1,000. I appreciate the need that everyone feels to be liberated. I gave you an example yesterday. In South Korea, one person in a nightclub area between Saturday and today spawned a 100-case cluster. Because of that, South Korea now has to trace 5,000 persons, and because of that one cluster, they now have to delay the opening of schools. That is the context in which these decisions are made. I understand, we sympathize, we empathize with everyone who wants to just rush out there and get back to normal life. Let me crystallize what we are dealing with in one sentence. We always say doctors make life and death decisions. Today, it is not only doctors making life and death decisions. Every individual who wants to open up everything now is making a life and death decision. The photograph you saw yesterday outside the Doubles truck with about 20 people, only one wearing a mask. They are making life and death decisions. And prior, the life they may affect is yours, because you don't know if you will come into contact with them. Everybody who is not wearing a mask is making a life and death decision. Not only their life and their death, but my life and my death, the healthcare workers' life and death. These are not normal times. As we adjust to the new normal, the phased reopening is being done based on our local public health authorities, which have led us brilliantly to date, but also on the errors that other countries have made. And let me repeat, South Korea had to revisit the opening of schools because one person spawned a 100-case cluster. So it is difficult to give in to every single request to open everything. We have gone the way with food because we want food to be available. It creates some employment. Small, medium, and large players dominate the market. We have also allowed some construction to start. We never stopped the Curab interchange. We gave the Ministry of Works and Transport permission to engage in every construction project for flood alleviation. Hospital construction never stopped. So construction on a slightly reduced basis went on during our part of the pandemic, and now we are gradually thawing out. The thaw-out process in the first 2 weeks prior is the most critical, because how we conduct ourselves in this 2-week period will determine if people can go back to swim after May the 24th. So that is what we have to hold on to prior. So I hope that answers your question, my friend.
Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much. We at the Ministry of Finance over the last month have been adjusting our medium-term macroeconomic fiscal framework. We've done projections up to the year 2023. We've looked at all the sources of funding available to cover our budget deficit, our projected budget deficits going forward up to 2023, and our debt servicing. And we are satisfied on a proper examination of all that is available that there's more than adequate financing available to cover both the budget deficit and debt servicing. What you should note is that some of the financing facilities that we have pursued in the last month or two are very generous in terms of their terms and conditions. For example, the loans that we are accessing from the Andean Development Bank, also known as CAF, have a 20-year repayment period, a 5-year moratorium on payments, so we will not have to pay anything for 5 years, and at very generous interest rates, just over 3%. That is also what is being made available to us from the Inter-American Development Bank and the World Bank. There are other sources of funding that we have been able to tap into, which are giving us very, very generous terms. So we've done a full projection of debt servicing, debt to GDP ratios, projected growth in the economy, sources of financing, and as I said, there's more than adequate financing to support all of these measures we're taking to deal with the pandemic, and also going forward into the next several years in terms of rebuilding the economy. I don't think we have any difficulty at all. We've been doing our homework for the last month.
Thank you. 98.1.
Good morning again to the head table. Stephen Cummings, 98.1 FM. Two questions quickly, one for the Minister of Finance and the other for the Minister of Communication. All right. The Minister of Finance. Minister, you mentioned provisions being made for small and medium-sized businesses, but I didn't hear provisions specifically for the micro enterprise sector, and I'd like if you can just expand on that in terms of what is available, what can micro enterprise persons in that sector can look forward to in terms of relief package. And Minister of Communications, one recognizes the importance of the ministry, and we do have a Spanish-speaking population among us, registered and unregistered. I believe in the population numbers of about probably 30,000, a number which was previously quoted by the Prime Minister. Can provisions be made to have Spanish translations, however appropriate, of these very important conferences to this section of the population in the interest of providing a level of linguistic support and comfort?
Thank you. The micro enterprises fit within the small business sector, but as you go down, the scale and the level of funding that is required is less, and the capacity, of course, is far less. The ability to withstand a shock such as the pandemic is less. You have to have different approaches. I've outlined a general program where the government will subsidize the interest on loans, and we're also going to ask the bank to give persons a 2-year moratorium on repayments of principal. So the government will be repaying the entire interest on the loans, and the arrangement will be such that the borrowers would not have to pay any principal for the 2 years. So no payments at all from small enterprises, which includes micro. But when you get to the very small entities, it's well recognized all over the world that you have to give them some assistance by way of grant funding. So that would be the final element of our small and medium and micro enterprise program. But one has to be very, very careful about grant funding, that it is not abused. So what I wanted to announce this morning is that we are providing subsidized interest, and we will be providing a level of government guarantee, and it will be so structured that no payments will be required at all from borrowers for the first 2 years. At the micro level, we would have to look at some form of small grant funding.
Thank you very much, Stephen Cummins. We have been doing some translation of some of our material, but I know we have to ramp it up some more. And we have, as a matter of fact, we are even looking for volunteers to assist us, because we have been sending out information every day, and it has been a bit difficult, but we will be ramping it up. So if there's anyone out there who wants to assist us, we will be very grateful. Thank you. Tobago Channel 5.
My question is for the Minister of Finance. I know it might be a little bit early, but I was wondering, what is the government thinking in regards to the tourism sector and the future of the tourism sector? Of course, with all the changes that are likely to take place and the travel arrangements and so on, are we still depending on, or are we still putting as much hope in the tourism sector as we were in the last couple of years?
The question is a little bit early. That's true. We really have to be very careful about how we deal with the tourism sector. It's not certain what's going to happen in terms of air travel as we go forward. That would be the last thing I would think that would recover to its pre-COVID state. But I mean, we have to diversify the economy. One of the things good things that has come out of this experience is a genuine commitment on the part of everyone now to look at alternative revenue streams. And certainly I would think once this virus is addressed, you know, there are all sorts of theories about it. I am not going to try and be an expert. As a non-expert, I would think we would need to wait until a vaccine is developed. But you know, people say all sorts of things. So I will just stick with what the experts say. But assuming that a vaccine will be developed in the future, in the near future, I would think that air travel can resume, and certainly tourism would resume. And I would think we have to look to things like tourism, and build agriculture, build export manufacturing, build local substitution as engines of our economy. So I would not want to, as your question implied, I'm not saying anything pejorative, but as your question implied, I would certainly not want to write off the tourism sector. I think it's something that we need to look at for future growth and development once air travel resumes.
Thank you. Astronaut Health News.
Bernard Stewart, Astronaut Health Newspaper. Good morning to everyone at the head table.
Good morning.
Can government allow religious organizations to give monetary allocations in food vouchers rather than hampers to take the burden off the magnitude of shopping of the churches, and also allow receivers to get what they really need and maybe get it faster? That's one question. And the other is, what's the status of receipt of COVID-19 grants for citizens who have been losing income?
Okay.
Is that you're talking about the salary relief grant?
Yes.
Okay. Minister of Finance?
Sure. I can give some information. As I indicated what our targets are in terms of funding, we expect at the Ministry of Finance to, when it's all over, to spend close to $500 million on salary relief grants. The Ministry of Social Development has a total of $400 million allocated to them, of which the bulk would be for income support grants. In terms of numbers, my understanding is that we've crossed the 12,000 mark at the Ministry of Finance, and I just got an email from the Ministry of Social Development giving some details as to what they have been able to do in terms of grants. My understanding is that they have a significant number of applications, over 20,000, that's what I'm told. And that in terms of grants, I think they are just around the 10,000 mark. But our allocation for these two forms of support is a total of 900 million. 500 million in finance and 400 million in the Ministry of Social Development. With respect to the question about the churches, I have seen some of the churches giving out vouchers from the supermarkets, and by way of a card actually. And once it's for the purpose intended, we are not going to dictate to the religious bodies how they should provide food support to the poor and needy. It may be more convenient to give a card so that the person would not have to go through the trouble of coming to collect the hamper. The hamper may not have the ingredients in it that they may think is appropriate for them. So that is something I'm sure will be managed properly by the Office of the Prime Minister in consultation with the churches. But I'm not aware there's any prohibition on the use of grocery vouchers or grocery cards at this time.
TV6.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
TV6.
Good morning.
I have some questions for the Health Minister,
Yes.
Minister Dialsing. So, Minister, I'm trying to get a gist from you, not just about food places, but generally, how do you feel about what you saw yesterday? And we're talking about, yes, hygiene, we're talking about physical distancing, but you did mention a bit about mask wearing, of course, occupancy of. Now, while you were talking about mask wearing, you did say that you noticed some picture, 20 persons, one person is wearing a mask. In that light, would government consider making mask wearing a regulation as opposed to a recommendation? So just those two questions, how do you feel about what you saw yesterday and your consideration for making mask wearing regulation?
Thank you. Thanks for the question. So between yesterday and today, Urvashi, I visited a number of food people. I visited doubles vendors, a couple bakeries, international chains, local chains, a roti shop, where I go for lunch. And as I said, I saw from the excellent to the tragic. What we are going to start to do is start to put out strong advisories as to what public health measures can be put in place. For instance, a simple one. You put up a plexiglass screen between your cashiers and your customers. That is simple, not expensive, and highly effective, just like an immigration officer is protected at the airport. So it's not only masks, it is all the common sense public health measures, physical distancing, and so on. The issue that you raise, and quite properly, is it going to be a law? The Attorney General is looking at that issue right now, as I indicated last week in response to a similar question. So the Attorney General is looking at whether wearing of masks can in fact be a law or be a part of the regulations. Because it is these simple public health measures, sanitization, staying home if you are ill, wearing a mask, physical distancing, washing your hands often. It is those very simple public health measures that will continue to help us flatten the curve. So I hope that answers your question, Urvashi.
I-95.5.
Good morning, everyone. Whitfield Turner from I-95.5. Minister Dialsing.
Yes, sir.
With the of some aspects of the economy yesterday, we had reports coming in where children and the elderly have begun commingling. And in some cases, it's a case where parents apparently are now offloading children onto the elderly to get a break from them. What would you like to see to persons in such a situation? And to Minister Imbert, reports coming to hand a short while ago is that the radar at the Met Office is currently down and they're experiencing some fiscal challenges in bringing it back online. Is there any way you can intervene to assist in getting it back up and running, especially given that we are a couple of weeks out from the start of what is forecast to be above active hurricane season?
Okay, so thank you for the question. Children and parents. As we have been saying from this platform for the past month, the elderly is the most vulnerable group in this whole COVID pandemic. When you look at the deaths globally and locally and regionally, the vast majority of deaths, unfortunately, come from that elderly population, especially those with pre-existing conditions. My advice is for any parent to commingle their children with their grandparents. Ensure that if you do so, these elderly do not have pre-existing conditions like diabetes, hypertension, any cancers. They are taking any drugs that depresses their immune systems like steroids, that these grandparents are not asthmatics with compromised respiratory systems. It is very, very easy for the virus to jump from a healthy child who may not know that they have the virus, very easy to jump to an elderly. And the elderly, as you heard Dr. Parkinson say here when he was here talking about ventilation, once you go onto a ventilator, your chances of coming off that and having a positive outcome is very, very small. So I urge parents not to, as you say, take a break from your children or offload your children onto the elderly who have pre-existing conditions. Let me go back to my earlier statement. In this response to the pandemic, we are all doctors. We are all now making life and death decisions. And that decision to offload your child onto an elderly parent is a life and death decision. So we are all doctors now. We are all making life and death decisions. Hope that answers your question. Thank you very much.
Before we move on, I just want to remind members of the media that this press conference is basically to deal with COVID-19 and surrounding issues. Minister Imbert, you may answer if you so wish.
Thank you. I am not yet the minister in charge of the Met Office. I don't think I've ever been. But as Minister of Finance, I would most certainly speak to my colleague and ensure that if any funding is required to get the Met service back up, and we'll determine how accurate that report is, and if it is so, I will make sure that whatever funding is required will be made available. But unfortunately, I'm not yet responsible for the Met Office.
Thank you. 91.9.
Good morning.
Good morning.
91.9 FM. Good morning.
Good morning.
For the ministers, just a quick question. With respect to all of this double jeopardy that we are facing with the fall in oil prices, as well as the COVID-19 response and the expenditure that we have to put out to provide relief, Minister Imbert, how do you see this affecting our 2020-2021 budget in terms of allocations that will be requested from various ministries and, of course, the THA? If you could give us some feedback on that, because it will also signal how soon we'll probably have to dip into the HSF. And for the Minister of Health, it may be just a comment. A number of persons have been challenging what they would deem as essential services, and one that I've found to have some good validity is persons that provide support in terms of computer repairs, security camera systems, and other computer systems that help people with communication technologies. They've been claiming their shops have to stay closed, and they wanted some advice from the government in terms of their role and how they could execute to help persons with their communications issues. Thank you. Good morning.
Okay, so I'll take the second part first. But Vern, as I said at the start, it is possible for everyone in every industry to justify that they are essential. If we give in to every request, we might as well flip a switch, open the economy, let the virus rampage through the economy, let 1,000 people die, and where would we be? Could we put back up that pyramid, please? Because I think unless people understand what we are dealing with, Vern, we are doing the country a great disservice. That is how the infection spreads. So if we open up every hairdresser, every nail salon, every pool, every computer store, every bookstore, every this, every that, and 10,000 people die, Vern, you will be the first to ask for my resignation. You will be the first. Because you would say, I should have known that this would happen. Vern, we simply can't flip a switch. And given, we understand. Other countries are going through this. Airlines have gone bankrupt. Norwegian cruise is going bankrupt. Tourism has taken a hit. But the underlying thing is we want a life that we could go back to in a few weeks. So just bear with us for the next little under a week and a half. We are already 2 days into this. Then we will see what sort of spike in cases we get. If it is a spike that is not dangerous, that doesn't threaten the country as a whole, that 500 elderly don't die, then we can look at crunching phases 2, 3, and 4. So the computer store, the bookstore, the nail salon, the hairdresser, the swimming pool. We could look then at making some further decisions. But for the next week and a half, we have to stay the course. The course is a carefully developed one. We are in uncharted waters. We have no historical data to go back and say, if we do this, if we open this, 100 people will die, or I need 500 bed spaces. I have no precedent to go on to give in to every sector of the economy that wants to open up. We are in this together, but in this together for the first time. So we have to be ultra cautious, Vern, and I hope that gives you some comfort. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I think there was another question.
Vern, there was another question. The questions.
Yes.
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 The first question was right to Minister Imbert in terms of looking at the expenditures that we have to put out for COVID and the drop in oil prices. How is that going to affect us going into the next budget, especially with allocations for various ministries as well as the THA?
As you will know, in 2016, we were faced with an oil shock. The price of oil dropped to $25. And in those days, we didn't have the benefit of increased gas production, natural gas production. Natural gas production was significantly lower then than it is now. So we were faced with a significant shortfall in revenues from natural gas and significant shortfall in revenues from oil. Our taxation regime as well wasn't properly structured to provide value for money for citizens of this country. As you will agree, we managed to come out of that oil price shock in 2016, and we've managed to keep the country running for the last 4.5 years without any disruption in terms of not being able to pay public servants' salaries, not being able to pay basic expenses. We've managed to service our debt on time. We've met all our mandatory payments, and we've been able to do a number of development projects in that 4.5 years, notwithstanding a 90% decline in revenues from petroleum. What that has demonstrated, and it has not demonstrated just to us, but to the international rating agencies, is that this government has the ability to adjust and accommodate and reorganize its approach to fiscal and monetary policy in terms of managing a shock. We moved very quickly when we saw the problems with COVID-19. There was a double problem. There was a collapse of oil prices because of a price war between Saudi Arabia and Russia, and to some extent America. And then you have the decline in business activity generally from the worldwide lockdown. But we at the Ministry of Finance, having already dealt with a previous oil price shock where our revenue dropped to 36 billion from 56 billion in just 2 years, we moved very swiftly to determine what our approach should be in terms of dealing with the problems associated with this double whammy, as you call it, that we got this year. And as I've already indicated, we have already decided that we'll keep the economy moving along by trying to spend the original budget, which of course requires additional financing. Fortunately, we're getting a lot of support from international financing institutions. We have amended the Heritage and Stabilization Fund Act to allow us to withdraw as and when required from the fund. But in addition to that, while all of this is going on, the rating agencies have been coming. They haven't locked down. So we had Standard & Poor's coming here, and despite oil revenues dropping by almost 70% in a matter of a month, we were able to maintain a stable outlook with Standard & Poor's, stable for Trinidad and Tobago, and also maintain an investment grade rating. That was just last month. We've been dealing with Moody's over the last week, and we have shown them our projections going forward for the next 3 to 4 years in terms of managing the economy, in terms of engineering growth in the economy, in terms of managing the fiscal deficit. And we believe we have a very good plan. We've been able to do it before. We think we can do it again. And we think we can manage this problem quite well because Trinidad and Tobago is a different country to many countries in the world. Not many countries have a sovereign wealth fund as we have. Not many countries have been able to successfully manage fiscal consolidation as we have over the last 4.5 years, being able to cut expenditure by 20% and still manage to reconstruct the economy, stabilize the economy, and set it on a growth path. So we have demonstrated that we have the capacity, and we're quite confident that looking at various approaches to rebuilding the economy, that we can find the financing. There are more than adequate resources, as I said, and the country is in good hands for the next 3 to 4 years.
Thank you. TTT?
Ian Wilson from TTT News.
Morning.
Good morning.
Just for the sake of clarity, I'm not sure which of the ministers will take this, but for the sake of clarity, I'm seeing that the TRHA, they were allotted a sum of money directly or independently from the THA or the Ministry of Health. Is that normally the case, or is this a special case?
In this particular case, the Ministry of Health had asked for assistance for the 4 RHAs in Trinidad, because under the Tobago House of Assembly Act, the THA, it's a fact that is not widely understood. The Tobago House of Assembly is responsible for the Tobago Regional Health Authority. So when the Minister of Health came to the Cabinet and asked for supplementary funding for the RHAs, that was for the RHAs in Trinidad. And since it's an RHA in Tobago, we have allocated funding directly to the Tobago RHA, consistent with the type of support proportionately that we've been giving to Trinidad.
And just to add clarity, the cabinet note that gave supplemental funding for the 4 RHAs in Trinidad was 157 million. So 157 million for the 4 RHAs in Trinidad and 50 for Tobago. So that gives you a total of 207 million.
But we have also accessed some loan financing of 250 million in addition to give the Ministry of Health that safety blanket going forward for any problem that may occur with respect to COVID.
Thank you very much, ministers. We have come to the end of today's virtual media conference. Do remember that the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Communications are your only credible sources of government information on COVID-19. Trinidad and Tobago, we heard you. We know it is difficult to remain indoors. For some, it is a time to reflect, but for others, it may be another day without a paycheck. Businesses are also hurting, and which is why the government has intervened as far as it possibly can to ease some of the pressures brought on by this unprecedented situation. This morning, the Minister of Finance outlined the financial impact this virus has had on our economy. No one or any sector has been spared. We are living in uncertain times, but what we do know is that it cannot be business as usual. This situation demands of us behavior change. It is the only way we can lift some of the restrictions many of you are clamoring for. This cannot happen if what we saw at the street vendor yesterday morning is replicated over and over again throughout the country. What took place there provides our healthcare professionals with evidence to reverse course and put the brakes on eased restrictions. To businesses, your time will come to reopen. We know your bottom line has been impacted, and if infections do not rise as we go through the phases, you will be allowed to restart your operations. However, we would all agree that health must come before our wealth. That is the only way we will enjoy the fruits of our labor and live to see our economy return to a position of strength. Please be patient. We are all in this together. I am Donna Cox, Minister of Communications. Thank you for joining us today as the government continues its efforts to flatten the curve and beat COVID-19. Stay home. Stay safe. May God bless Trinidad and Tobago.
And that was an update on the COVID-19 pandemic from the Ministry of Health. A quick review of some of the key points we just heard. The Finance Minister gave us an indication that $934 million have already been spent in relief efforts, already paid out thus far. Now, this is inclusive of $700 million of VAT refund and $100 million injected into credit unions. Now, specifically for micro, small, and medium enterprises, $300 million are allocated for same, and we are looking forward to getting some more definite information next week about loans for micro, small, and medium enterprises. From the Minister of Health, it seems as though Peter may need to pay for Paul. Hopefully, Paul does not need to pay for all in terms of setting forward minimal requirements for businesses operating, and that has already been submitted to the AG. So I guess we can look out for regulation number 14 in short order. Also, 738 community samples have been done. All, thankfully, have returned negative thus far. 107 discharges and 1 person is hospitalized at Cora. Normally we say Couva, but that person is now at Cora. And of course, we are being reminded that we must stay at home to stay safe and save lives. I'm DK Rosta. Stay with us here on TTT, Chalk City 91.1 FM, Sweet 100.1 FM, Next 99.1 FM, and on Facebook at TTT Live Online for the latest COVID-19 news.
Space and time, filling the gaps in our hearts and our minds with love.